Section 22. Suddenly, Elizabeth stepped forward and most competently boarded the omnibus, in front of everybody. She took a seat on top. The impetuous creature, a pirate, started forward, sprang away. She had to hold the rail to steady herself, for a pirate it was, reckless, unscrupulous, bearing down ruthlessly, circumventing dangerously, boldly snatching a passenger or ignoring a passenger, squeezing eel-like and arrogant in between, and then rushing insolently, all sails spread, up Whitehall. And did Elizabeth give one thought to poor Miss Kilman, who loved her without jealousy, to whom she had been a fawn in the open, a moon in a glade? She was delighted to be free. The fresh air was so delicious. It had been so stuffy in the Army and Navy stores, and now it was like riding, to be rushing up Whitehall, and to each movement of the omnibus the beautiful body in the fawn-coloured coat responded freely like a rider, like the figurehead of a ship. For the breeze slightly disarrayed her, the heat gave her cheeks the pallor of white-painted wood, and her fine eyes, having no eyes to meet, gazed ahead, blank, bright, with the staring, incredible innocence of sculpture. It was always talking about her own sufferings that made Miss Kilman so difficult. And was she right? If it was being on committees and giving up hours and hours every day, she hardly ever saw him in London, that helped the poor. Her father did that, goodness knows. If that was what Miss Kilman meant about being a Christian, but it was so difficult to say. Oh, she would like to go a little further. Another penny, was it, to the Strand? Here was another penny, then. She would go up the Strand. She liked people who were ill, and every profession is open to the women of your generation, said Miss Kilman. So she might be a doctor. She might be a farmer. Animals are often ill. She might own 1,000 acres and have people under her. She would go and see them in their cottages. This was Somerset House. One might be a very good farmer, and that, strangely enough, though Miss Kilman had her share in it, was almost entirely due to Somerset House. It looked so splendid, so serious, that great grey building. And she liked the feeling of people working. She liked those churches, like shapes of grey paper, breasting the stream of the Strand. It was quite different here from Westminster, she thought, getting off at Chancery Lane. It was so serious, it was so busy. In short, she would like to have a profession. She would become a doctor, a farmer, possibly go into Parliament if she found it necessary, all because of the Strand. The feet of those people busy about their activities, hands putting stone to stone, minds eternally occupied, not with trivial chatterings, comparing women to poplars, which was rather exciting, of course, but very silly, but with thoughts of ships, of business, of law, of administration, and with it all so stately. She was in the Temple, gay, there was the river, pious, there was the church, made her quite determined, whatever her mother might say, to become either a farmer or a doctor. But she was, of course, rather lazy, and it was much better to say nothing about it. It seemed so silly. It was the sort of thing that did sometimes happen when one was alone. Buildings without architects' names, crowds of people coming back from the city having more power than single clergymen in Kensington, than any of the books Miss Kilman had lent her, to stimulate what lay slumberous, clumsy, and shy on the mind's sandy floor to break surface, as a child suddenly stretches its arms. It was just that, perhaps, a sigh, a stretch of the arms, an impulse, a revelation, which has its effects forever, and then down again it went to the sandy floor. She must go home. She must dress for dinner. But what was the time? Where was a clock? She looked up Fleet Street. She walked just a little way towards St. Paul's, shyly, like someone penetrating on tiptoe, exploring a strange house by night with a candle, on edge lest the owner should suddenly fling wide his bedroom door and ask her business. Nor did she dare wander off into queer alleys, tempting by-streets, any more than in a strange house open doors which might be bedroom doors, or sitting-room doors, or lead straight to the larder. For no Dalloways came down the Strand daily. She was a pioneer, a stray, venturing, trusting. In many ways, her mother felt, she was extremely immature, like a child still, attached to dolls, to old slippers, a perfect baby, and that was charming. But then, of course, there was in the Dalloway family the tradition of public service, abbesses, principals, headmistresses, dignitaries, in the Republic of Women, without being brilliant, any of them. They were that. She penetrated a little further in the direction of St. Paul's. She liked the geniality, sisterhood, motherhood, brotherhood of this uproar. It seemed to her good. The noise was tremendous, and suddenly there were trumpets, the unemployed, blaring, rattling about in the uproar, military music, as if people were marching. Yet had they been dying? Had some woman breathed her last, and whoever was watching, opening the window of the room where she had just brought off that act of supreme dignity, looked down on Fleet Street, that uproar, that military music would have come triumphing up to him, consolatory, indifferent. It was not conscious. There was no recognition in it of one fortune or fate, and for that very reason, even to those dazed with watching for the last shivers of consciousness on the faces of the dying, consoling. Forgetfulness in people might wound, their ingratitude corrode, but this voice, pouring endlessly year in, year out, would take whatever it might be, this vow, this van, this life, this procession, would wrap them all about and carry them on, as in the rough stream of a glacier the ice holds a splinter of bone, a blue petal, some oak trees, and rolls them on. But it was later than she thought. Her mother would not like her to be wandering off alone like this. She turned back down the Strand. A puff of wind, in spite of the heat there was quite a wind, blew a thin black veil over the sun and over the Strand. The faces faded, the omnibuses suddenly lost their glow. For although the clouds were of mountainous white so that one could fancy hacking hard chips off with a hatchet, with broad golden slopes, lawns of celestial pleasure gardens on their flanks, and had all the appearance of settled habitations assembled for the conference of gods above the world, there was a perpetual movement among them. Signs were interchanged when, as if to fulfil some scheme arranged already, now a summit dwindled. Now a whole block of pyramidal size, which had kept its station inalterably, advanced into the midst, or gravely led the procession to fresh anchorage. Fixed though they seemed at their posts, at rest in perfect unanimity, nothing could be fresher, freer, more sensitive superficially than the snow-white or gold-kindled surface. To change, to go, to dismantle the solemn assemblage was immediately possible. And in spite of the grave fixity, the accumulated robustness and solidity, now they struck light to the earth, now darkness. Calmly and competently, Elizabeth Dalloway mounted the Westminster omnibus. Going and coming, beckoning, signalling, so the light and shadow which now made the wall grey, now the bananas bright yellow, now made the Strand grey, now made the omnibuses bright yellow, seemed to Septimus Warren Smith lying on the sofa in the sitting-room, watching the watery gold glow and fade with the astonishing sensibility of some live creature on the roses, on the wallpaper. Outside, the trees dragged their leaves like nets through the depths of the air. The sound of water was in the room, and through the waves came the voices of birds singing. Every power poured its treasures on his head, and his hand lay there on the back of the sofa, as he had seen his hand lie when he was bathing, floating, on the top of the waves, while far away on shore he heard dogs barking and barking far away. "Fear no more," says the heart in the body, "fear no more." He was not afraid. At every moment nature signified by some laughing hint, like that gold spot which went round the wall, there, there, there. Her determination to show, by brandishing her plumes, shaking her tresses, flinging her mantle this way and that, beautifully, always beautifully, and standing close up to breathe through her hollowed hands Shakespeare's words, her meaning. Risha, sitting at the table, twisting a hat in her hands, watched him, saw him smiling. He was happy then. But she could not bear to see him smiling. It was not marriage. It was not being one's husband to look strange like that, always to be starting, laughing, sitting hour after hour silent, or clutching her and telling her to write. The table drawer was full of those writings, about war, about Shakespeare, about great discoveries, how there is no death. Lately he had become excited suddenly for no reason, and both Dr. Holmes and Sir William Bradshaw said excitement was the worst thing for him, and waved his hands and cried out that he knew the truth, he knew everything. That man, his friend who was killed, Evans, had come, he said. He was singing behind the screen. She wrote it down just as he spoke it. Some things were very beautiful, others sheer nonsense. And he was always stopping in the middle, changing his mind, wanting to add something, hearing something new, listening with his hand up. But she heard nothing. And once they found the girl who did the room reading one of these papers in fits of laughter. It was a dreadful pity. For that made Septimus cry out about human cruelty, how they tear each other to pieces. The fallen, he said, they tear to pieces. Holmes is on us, he would say, and he would invent stories about Holmes. Holmes eating porridge, Holmes reading Shakespeare, making himself roar with laughter or rage, for Dr. Holmes seemed to stand for something horrible to him. Human nature, he called him. Then there were the visions. He was drowned, he used to say, and lying on a cliff with the gulls screaming over him. He would look over the edge of the sofa down into the sea. Or he was hearing music. Really it was only a barrel organ or some man crying in the street. But lovely, he used to cry, and the tears would run down his cheeks, which was to her the most dreadful thing of all, to see a man like Septimus, who had fought, who was brave, crying. And he would lie listening until suddenly he would cry that he was falling down, down into the flames. Actually, she would look for flames. It was so vivid. But there was nothing. They were alone in the room. It was a dream, she would tell him, and so quiet him at last. But sometimes she was frightened too. She sighed as she sat sewing. Her sigh was tender and enchanting, like the wind outside a wood in the evening. Now she put down her scissors. Now she turned to take something from the table. A little stir, a little crinkling, a little tapping built up something on the table there where she sat sewing. Through his eyelashes he could see her blurred outline, her little black body, her face and hands, her turning movements at the table as she took up a reel, or looked, as she was apt to lose things, for her silk. She was making a hat for Mrs. Filmer's married daughter, whose name was... He had forgotten her name. "What is the name of Mrs. Filmer's married daughter?" he asked. "Mrs. Peters," said Risha. She was afraid it was too small, she said, holding it before her. Mrs. Peters was a big woman, but she did not like her. It was only because Mrs. Filmer had been so good to them. "She gave me grapes this morning," she said, that Risha wanted to do something to show that they were grateful. She had come into the room the other evening and found Mrs. Peters, who thought they were out, playing the gramophone. "Was it true?" he asked. She was playing the gramophone? Yes, she had told him about it at the time. She had found Mrs. Peters playing the gramophone. Section 23. He began very cautiously to open his eyes, to see whether a gramophone was really there. But real things were too exciting. He must be cautious. He would not go mad. First he looked at the fashion papers on the lower shelf, then gradually at the gramophone with the green trumpet. Nothing could be more exact. And so, gathering courage, he looked at the sideboard, the plate of bananas, the engraving of Queen Victoria and the Prince Consort, at the mantelpiece with the jar of roses. None of these things moved. All were still. All were real. "She is a woman with a spiteful tongue," said Risha. "What does Mr. Peters do?" Septimus asked. "Ah," said Risha, trying to remember. She thought Mrs. Filmer had said that he travelled for some company. "Just now he is in Hull," she said. Just now, she said that with her Italian accent. She said that herself. He shaded his eyes so that he might see only a little of her face at a time, first the chin, then the nose, then the forehead, in case it were deformed, or had some terrible mark on it. But no, there she was, perfectly natural, sewing, with the pursed lips that women have, the set, the melancholy expression when sewing. But there was nothing terrible about it, he assured himself, looking a second time, a third time at her face, her hands, for what was frightening or disgusting in her as she sat there in broad daylight sewing? Mrs. Peters had a spiteful tongue. Mr. Peters was in Hull. Why then rage and prophesy? Why fly scourged and outcast? Why be made to tremble and sob by the clouds? Why seek truths and deliver messages when Risha sat sticking pins into the front of her dress and Mr. Peters was in Hull? Miracles, revelations, agonies, loneliness, falling through the sea, down, down into the flames, all were burnt out, for he had a sense, as he watched Risha trimming the straw hat for Mrs. Peters, of a coverlet of flowers. "It's too small for Mrs. Peters," said Septimus. For the first time for days he was speaking as he used to do. Of course it was, absurdly small, she said, but Mrs. Peters had chosen it. He took it out of her hands. He said it was an organ-grinder's monkey's hat. How it rejoiced her that. Not for weeks had they laughed like this together, poking fun privately like married people. What she meant was that if Mrs. Filmer had come in, or Mrs. Peters, or anybody, they would not have understood what she and Septimus were laughing at. "There," she said, pinning a rose to one side of the hat. Never had she felt so happy, never in her life. But that was still more ridiculous, Septimus said. Now the poor woman looked like a pig at a fair. Nobody ever made her laugh as Septimus did. What had she got in her workbox? She had ribbons and beads, tassels, artificial flowers. She tumbled them out on the table. He began putting odd colours together, for though he had no fingers, could not even do up a parcel, he had a wonderful eye, and often he was right, sometimes absurd, of course, but sometimes wonderfully right. "She shall have a beautiful hat," he murmured, taking up this and that, Risha kneeling by his side, looking over his shoulder. Now it was finished. That is to say, the design. She must stitch it together. But she must be very, very careful, he said, to keep it just as he had made it. So she sewed. When she sewed, he thought, she made a sound like a kettle on the hob, bubbling, murmuring, always busy, her strong little pointed fingers pinching and poking, her needle flashing straight. The sun might go in and out on the tassels, on the wallpaper, but he would wait, he thought, stretching out his feet, looking at his ringed sock at the end of the sofa. He would wait in this warm place, the pocket of still air, which one comes on at the edge of a wood sometimes in the evening, when, because of a fall in the ground or some arrangement of the trees, one must be scientific, above all, scientific. Warmth lingers, and the air buffets the cheek like the wing of a bird. "There it is," said Risha, twirling Mrs. Peters' hat on the tips of her fingers. "That'll do for the moment. Later—" Her sentence bubbled away. Drip, 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 like a contented tap left running. It was wonderful. Never had he done anything which made him feel so proud. It was so real, it was so substantial, Mrs. Peters' hat. "Just look at it," he said. Yes, it would always make her happy to see that hat. He had become himself then. He had laughed then. They had been alone together. Always she would like that hat. He told her to try it on. "But I must look so queer," she cried, running over to the glass and looking first this side, then that. Then she snatched it off again, for there was a tap at the door. Could it be Sir William Bradshaw? Had he sent already? No, it was only the small girl with the evening paper. What always happened, then happened. What happened every night of their lives. The small girl sucked her thumb at the door, Risha went down on her knees, Risha cooed and kissed, Risha got a bag of sweets out of the table drawer, for so it always happened. First one thing, then another. So she built it up, first one thing and then another. Dancing, skipping, round and round the room they went. He took the paper. Surrey was all out, he read. There was a heat wave, Risha repeated. Surrey was all out. There was a heat wave, making it part of the game she was playing with Mrs. Filmer's grandchild, both of them laughing, chattering at the same time at their game. He was very tired. He was very happy. He would sleep. He shut his eyes. But directly he saw nothing, the sounds of the game became fainter and stranger, and sounded like the cries of people seeking and not finding, and passing further and further away. They had lost him. He started up in terror. What did he see? The plate of bananas on the sideboard. Nobody was there. Risha had taken the child to its mother. It was bedtime. That was it. To be alone forever. That was the doom pronounced in Milan when he came into the room and saw them cutting out buckram shapes with their scissors. To be alone forever. He was alone with the sideboard and the bananas. He was alone, exposed on this black eminence, stretched out, but not on a hilltop, not on a crag, on Mrs. Filmer's sitting-room sofa. As for the visions, the faces, the voices of the dead, where were they? There was a screen in front of him with black bulrushes and blue swallows. Where he had once seen mountains, where he had seen faces, where he had seen beauty, there was a screen. "Evans!" he cried. There was no answer. A mouse had squeaked, or a curtain rustled. Those were the voices of the dead. The screen, the coal scuttle, the sideboard remained to him. Let him then face the screen, the coal scuttle, and the sideboard. But Risha burst into the room, chattering. Some letter had come. Everybody's plans were changed. Mrs. Filmer would not be able to go to Brighton after all. There was no time to let Mrs. Williams know, and really Risha thought it very, very annoying when she caught sight of the hat and thought, perhaps she might just make a little... Her voice died out in contented melody. "Ah, damn!" she cried. It was a joke of theirs, her swearing. The needle had broken. Hat, child, Brighton, needle. She built it up. First one thing, then another. She built it up, sewing. She wanted him to say whether by moving the rose she had improved the hat. She sat on the end of the sofa. They were perfectly happy now, she said, suddenly, putting the hat down. For she could say anything to him now. She could say whatever came into her head. That was almost the first thing she had felt about him, that night in the cafe when he had come in with his English friends. He had come in rather shyly, looking round him, and his hat had fallen when he hung it up. That she could remember. She knew he was English, though not one of the large Englishmen her sister admired, for he was always thin, but he had a beautiful fresh colour, and with his big nose, his bright eyes, his way of sitting a little hunched made her think, she had often told him, of a young hawk, that first evening she saw him when they were playing dominoes and he had come in, of a young hawk. But with her he was always very gentle. She had never seen him wild or drunk, only suffering sometimes through this terrible war. But even so, when she came in, he would put it all away. Anything in the whole world, any little bother with her work, anything that struck her to say, she would tell him, and he understood at once. Her own family even were not the same. Being older than she was, and being so clever, how serious he was, wanting her to read Shakespeare before she could even read a child's story in English. Being so much more experienced, he could help her. And she too could help him. But this hat now. And then it was getting late. Sir William Bradshaw. She held her hands to her head, waiting for him to say, did he like the hat or not? And as she sat there, waiting, looking down, he could feel her mind, like a bird, falling from branch to branch, and always alighting, quite rightly. He could follow her mind as she sat there in one of those loose, lax poses that came to her naturally, and if he should say anything, at once she smiled, like a bird alighting with all its claws firm upon the bough. But he remembered Bradshaw said, "The people we are most fond of are not good for us when we are ill." Bradshaw said he must be taught to rest. Bradshaw said they must be separated. Must. Why must? What power had Bradshaw over him? What right has Bradshaw to say must to me? He demanded. It is because you talked of killing yourself, said Risha. Mercifully, she could now say anything to Septimus. So he was in their power. Holmes and Bradshaw were on him. The brute with the red nostrils was snuffing into every secret place. Must, it could say. Where were his papers, the things he had written? She brought him his papers, the things he had written, things she had written for him. She tumbled them out onto the sofa. They looked at them together. Diagrams, designs, little men and women brandishing sticks for arms with wings, were they, on their backs? Circles traced round shillings and sixpences, the suns and stars, zigzagging precipices with mountaineers ascending, roped together, exactly like knives and forks, sea pieces with little faces laughing out of what might perhaps be waves, the map of the world. Burn them, he cried. Now for his writings, how the dead sing behind rhododendron bushes, odes to time, conversations with Shakespeare, Evans. His messages from the dead. Do not cut down trees. Tell the Prime Minister. Universal love, the meaning of the world. Burn them, he cried. But Risha laid her hands on them. Some were very beautiful, she thought. She would tie them up, for she had no envelope, with a piece of silk. Even if they took him, she said, she would go with him. They could not separate them against their wills, she said. Section 24. Shuffling the edges straight, she did up the papers and tied the parcel almost without looking, sitting beside him, he thought, as if all her petals were about her. She was a flowering tree, and through her branches looked out the face of a lawgiver, who had reached a sanctuary where she feared no one, not Holmes, not Bradshaw, a miracle, a triumph, the last and greatest. Staggering, he saw her mount the appalling staircase, laden with Holmes and Bradshaw, men who never weighed less than 11 stone 6, who sent their wives to court, men who made 10,000 a year and talked of proportion, who, different in their verdicts, for Holmes said one thing, Bradshaw another, yet judges they were, who mixed the vision and the sideboard, saw nothing clear, yet ruled, yet inflicted. Must, they said. Over them she triumphed. "There," she said. The papers were tied up. No one should get at them. She would put them away, and, she said, nothing should separate them. She sat down beside him and called him by the name of that hawk or crow which, being malicious and a great destroyer of crops, was precisely like him. No one could separate them, she said. Then she got up to go into the bedroom to pack their things, but hearing voices downstairs and thinking that Dr. Holmes had perhaps called, ran down to prevent him coming up. Septimus could hear her talking to Holmes on the staircase. "My dear lady, I have come as a friend," Holmes was saying. "No, I will not allow you to see my husband," she said. He could see her, like a little hen with her wings spread barring his passage, but Holmes persevered. "My dear lady, allow me," Holmes said, putting her aside. Holmes was a powerfully built man. Holmes was coming upstairs. Holmes would burst open the door. Holmes would say, "In a funk, eh?" Holmes would get him. But no, not Holmes, not Bradshaw. Getting up rather unsteadily, hopping indeed from foot to foot, he considered Mrs. Filmer's nice clean bread knife with "bread" carved on the handle. Ah, but one mustn't spoil that. The gas fire? But it was too late now. Holmes was coming. Razors he might have got, but Risha, who always did that sort of thing, had packed them. There remained only the window, the large Bloomsbury lodging house window, the tiresome, the troublesome and rather melodramatic business of opening the window and throwing himself out. It was their idea of tragedy, not his or Risha's, for she was with him. Holmes and Bradshaw liked that sort of thing. He sat on the sill. But he would wait till the very last moment. He did not want to die. Life was good, the sun hot. Only human beings. What did they want? Coming down the staircase opposite, an old man stopped and stared at him. Holmes was at the door. "I'll give it to you," he cried, and flung himself vigorously, violently, down onto Mrs. Filmer's area railings. "The coward!" cried Dr. Holmes, bursting the door open. Risha ran to the window. She saw. She understood. Dr. Holmes and Mrs. Filmer collided with each other. Mrs. Filmer flapped her apron and made her hide her eyes in the bedroom. There was a great deal of running up and down stairs. Dr. Holmes came in, white as a sheet, shaking all over, with a glass in his hand. She must be brave and drink something, he said. What was it? Something sweet. For her husband was horribly mangled, would not recover consciousness, she must not see him, must be spared as much as possible, would have the inquest to go through, poor young woman. Who could have foretold it? A sudden impulse. No one was in the least to blame, he told Mrs. Filmer. And why the devil he did it, Dr. Holmes could not conceive. It seemed to her as she drank the sweet stuff that she was opening long windows, stepping out into some garden. But where? The clock was striking. 1, 2, 3. How sensible the sound was, compared with all this thumping and whispering, like Septimus himself. She was falling asleep. But the clock went on striking. 4, 5, 6. And Mrs. Filmer waving her apron, they wouldn't bring the body in here, would they? Seemed part of that garden, or a flag. She had once seen a flag slowly rippling out from a mast when she stayed with her aunt at Venice. Men killed in battle were thus saluted, and Septimus had been through the war. Of her memories, most were happy. She put on her hat and ran through cornfields. Where could it have been? Onto some hill, somewhere near the sea, for there were ships, gulls, butterflies. They sat on a cliff. In London, too, there they sat, and half dreaming came to her through the bedroom door, rain falling, whisperings, stirrings among dry corn, the caress of the sea, as it seemed to her, hollowing them in its arched shell and murmuring to her laid on shore. Strewn, she felt, like flying flowers over some tomb. "He is dead," she said, smiling at the poor old woman who guarded her with the honest light blue eyes fixed on the door. They wouldn't bring him in here, would they? But Mrs. Filmer pooh-poohed. Oh no, they were carrying him away now. Ought she not to be told? Married people ought to be together, Mrs. Filmer thought. But they must do as the doctor said. "Let her sleep," said Dr. Holmes, feeling her pulse. She saw the large outline of his body standing dark against the window. So that was Dr. Holmes. One of the triumphs of civilization, Peter Walsh thought. It is one of the triumphs of civilization, as the light high bell of the ambulance sounded. Swiftly, cleanly, the ambulance sped to the hospital, having picked up instantly, humanely, some poor devil, someone hit on the head, struck down by disease, knocked over perhaps a minute or so ago at one of these crossings, as might happen to oneself. That was civilization. It struck him coming back from the East, the efficiency, the organisation, the communal spirit of London. Every cart or carriage of its own accord drew aside to let the ambulance pass. Perhaps it was morbid, or was it not touching, rather, the respect which they showed this ambulance with its victim inside? Busy men hurrying home, yet instantly bethinking them as it passed of some wife, or presumably how easily it might have been them there, stretched on a shelf with a doctor and a nurse. Ah, but thinking became morbid, sentimental. Directly one began conjuring up doctors, dead bodies, a little glow of pleasure, a sort of lust too over the visual impression warned one not to go on with that sort of thing any more. Fatal to art, fatal to friendship. True. And yet, thought Peter Walsh, as the ambulance turned the corner, though the light high bell could be heard down the next street and still farther as it crossed the Tottenham Court Road, chiming constantly, it is the privilege of loneliness. In privacy one may do as one chooses. One might weep if no one saw. It had been his undoing, this susceptibility, in Anglo-Indian society, not weeping at the right time, or laughing either. I have that in me, he thought, standing by the pillar-box, which could now dissolve in tears. Why, heaven knows. Beauty of some sort, probably, and the weight of the day, which, beginning with that visit to Clarissa, had exhausted him with its heat, its intensity, and the drip, drip of one impression after another down into that cellar where they stood, deep, dark, and no one would ever know. Partly for that reason, its secrecy, complete and inviolable, he had found life like an unknown garden, full of turns and corners, surprising, yes. Really, it took one's breath away, these moments. There, coming to him by the pillar-box opposite the British Museum, one of them, a moment in which things came together, this ambulance, and life, and death. It was as if he was sucked up to some very high roof by that rush of emotion, and the rest of him, like a white shell-sprinkled beach, left bare. It had been his undoing in Anglo-Indian society, this susceptibility. Clarissa once, going on top of an omnibus with him somewhere, Clarissa superficially at least, so easily moved, now in despair, now in the best of spirits, all a-quiver in those days, and such good company, spotting queer little scenes, names, people from the top of a bus, for they used to explore London and bring back bags full of treasures from the Caledonian market. Clarissa had a theory in those days. They had heaps of theories, always theories, as young people have. It was to explain the feeling they had of dissatisfaction, not knowing people, not being known. For how could they know each other? You met every day, then not for 6 months or years. It was unsatisfactory, they agreed, how little one knew people. But, she said, sitting on the bus going up Shaftesbury Avenue, she felt herself everywhere, not here, here, here. And she tapped the back of the seat, but everywhere. She waved her hand going up Shaftesbury Avenue. She was all that. So that to know her, or anyone, one must seek out the people who completed them, even the places. Odd affinities she had with people she had never spoken to. Some woman in the street, some man behind a counter, even trees or barns. It ended in a transcendental theory which, with her horror of death, allowed her to believe, or say that she believed, for all her scepticism, that since our apparitions, the part of us which appears, are so momentary compared with the other, the unseen part of us, which spreads wide, the unseen might survive, be recovered somehow attached to this person or that, or even haunting certain places after death. Perhaps. Looking back over that long friendship of almost 30 years, her theory worked to this extent. Brief, broken, often painful, as their actual meetings had been, what with his absences and interruptions. This morning, for instance, in came Elizabeth, like a long-legged colt, handsome, dumb, just as he was beginning to talk to Clarissa. The effect of them on his life was immeasurable. There was a mystery about it. You were given a sharp, acute, uncomfortable grain, the actual meeting, horribly painful as often as not, yet in absence, in the most unlikely places, it would flower out, open, shed its scent, let you touch, taste, look about you, get the whole feel of it and understanding after years of lying lost. Thus she had come to him, on board ship, in the Himalayas, suggested by the oddest things. So Sally Seton, generous, enthusiastic goose, thought of him when she saw blue hydrangeas. She had influenced him more than any person he had ever known. And always in this way, coming before him without his wishing it, cool, ladylike, critical, or ravishing, romantic, recalling some field or English harvest. He saw her most often in the country, not in London. One scene after another at Burton.